What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Gerald here with your weather forecast. We've got a lot to talk about in today's video, but before we do that, I want to say thank you for all the growth we've seen over the past week or so, and that has continued, and we are getting very close to 1,000 subscribers. So if you are new here, let me introduce myself and try to persuade you, I guess, into joining us here on the channel. My name is Gerald. I am a meteorology major at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And pretty much the weather is my passion, so that's why I do this. I love to inform people, and I love to just talk about the weather in general, so that's why I do this. And if you think this is something you would like to see more often, go ahead and subscribe, because I do post daily, and I try to give you the best forecast I can in kind of an easy to understand way, although also in-depth enough that we get all of the main points down. But with all that said, let's go ahead and give you the game plan for today's video, because I do want you to have an idea of what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about this very, honestly, major ice storm that is ongoing right now across sections of Texas, into the south, into the kind of mid-Atlantic and Ohio River Valley area as well, seeing some of that ice. And we have a lot of people, in fact, millions of Americans right now under those warnings, watches, and all sorts of things. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about a dangerous cold shot that's going to make its way into the northeast going into this weekend. And I really do mean dangerous. I mean, we'll see some wind chills that are downright deadly for some of us. So we're going to definitely discuss that. And then we're going to touch on, after all of this craziness is done, what we can kind of expect on the backside of this, when I think we'll see a bit more sunshine and a bit more warmth. So if that's something you're looking forward to, we'll definitely talk about that. But with all that said, let's go ahead and get right into it, because we do have a lot to discuss, and I don't want to keep you here all day. So looking at these current watches and warnings, we got this big chunk of the country here, all the way from the Mexico border in Texas, all the way up through Arkansas, western Tennessee, most of Kentucky, parts of southern West Virginia under these watches, warnings, and advisories. This kind of pinkish color here that you see through kind of the heart of Texas are those winter storm warnings. And then kind of this purplish color here in the sections of Memphis and Little Rock, those are ice storm warnings. So these things, they have different criteria, but just what you need to know is the people that are kind of in the shaded area are seeing those winter weather impacts. So looking at radar right now, pretty much all of this precipitation that is falling here into sections of the southern plains is going to be some sort of wintry precipitation. We've seen a mix of different types of winter precipitation, but all of this is wintry precipitation falling here throughout this section of the country. We've also had some snow working its way through the mid-Atlantic and northeast today, so we've gotten some reports of some snow in a place like Philly today. I know we haven't seen much snow there at all this year, so that is kind of refreshing to see. And then some rain here in sections of the southern mid-Atlantic through the Carolinas as well today. So looking at those reports that we're dealing with, again, most of those reports right now coming in here from the southern plains, and I'll make this map a little bit easier to see for you. Actually, it's a little dark. So here we go. You can see we're getting a lot of these winter weather reports here from Oklahoma City down to Dallas, Fort Worth, and off towards the Little Rock area, and that is due to that precipitation that we just looked at on radar that is falling across this area. So we're definitely going to watch that continue into tonight and into the coming days. This will be a pretty long-lasting event for a lot of us. And then, as we discussed, we are even seeing some of those snow reports here up into the northeast. So why are we seeing all this right now? This is because of this boundary that is set up across the country here from Texas all the way up through New England, seeing those colder temperatures down here in the Dallas area. That's why we're getting that winter precipitation. Same story for Little Rock, Memphis, up here through sections of Kentucky, West Virginia. But for those of us here in the southeast, into the Carolinas, Georgia, we're in the 60s and 70s. So this is really quite mesmerizing to look at on a map like this, and it is not hard at all to find this boundary of that cold air versus that warm southeast ridge trying to fight it off. So let's go ahead and time this out for you here into the southern plains. We'll start here where we're having those worst impacts, and it's already been ongoing, but I think really the peak of this storm begins to move in going into tomorrow. So currently we are dealing with this batch of precipitation that we've been talking about from Dallas up through Little Rock. Little Rock's seeing a real mess right now as we approach 3 and 4 o'clock. As we go into tonight, this will begin to clear out a little bit. So I think going into the overnight, we'll see clearer weather into Dallas, Little Rock, down into southeastern Oklahoma, but that quickly changes going into tomorrow. As you can see here, as we get into the overnight and into around sunrise tomorrow, we get another batch of this precipitation coming in that is going to overlap this Arctic air, and that is going to set up the stage for what will likely be the climax of this event. You see, this begins to break out, and we get massive, kind of a massive area here of this freezing rain and sleet falling right over the heart of Texas, right into Dallas-Fort Worth, and especially areas, I think, to the west of Dallas. We'll also see a lot of this ice falling. That's likely where we'll have some of the highest accumulations. And this is right at tomorrow afternoon here, right around 2 o'clock here local time. And then this will continue going into tomorrow evening and then stretch up into sections of Oklahoma, back into Little Rock with even more of that ice there. And this continues, excuse me, into the evening of tomorrow before eventually, I think, we get some of this warmer Gulf air to kind of finally erode some of that Arctic air that's in place. So I think a place like Dallas going into Thursday, we will likely be done with this, although sections of the state back here towards the Panhandle might still have some of that cold air and winter weather hanging around. I think we'll begin to melt that ice away, warm back above freezing, and maybe even have just some plain old rain falling going into Thursday through Dallas and areas to the east and south of Dallas. But we likely hold on to that winter precipitation into sections of Little Rock through most of Thursday, as I think that cold air will hang on a little bit longer there. And then we'll watch for this little back piece of energy to potentially drop a little bit of snow here on the backside going into Thursday. So what I mean by those temperatures here, temperatures here, that was a bit of a tongue tie there, sorry about that. But as we go into later this week, you'll see that this cold air begins to finally kind of erode away. This is going into Wednesday afternoon. We're kind of much more marginal temperatures here, and especially going into Thursday, you can see that cold air finally really erodes away going into Thursday afternoon here, and we're pretty much all back above freezing mostly for our high temperatures on Thursday here through the southern plains. So much better conditions Thursday and into this weekend, but we have to get through tomorrow first. And so ice to come here through this section of the country, still widespread 1/4 of an inch to maybe 4/10 of an inch here, especially areas to the west of Dallas, as I talked about. And then up towards Little Rock, 1/10 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch of ice, also very possible there. So another place that is getting impacts from this winter weather event is here into the Tennessee kind of valley here and into sections of the mid-Atlantic. So let's talk about those areas as well. So going into tonight, that current batch of precipitation that's back towards Little Rock and Dallas is going to move here into the Memphis and Nashville area. So going into this evening, you see this mixed bag of precipitation with that freezing rain and sleet likely mixing together here through Memphis and then Nashville as well going into this evening. That will continue there. I think mainly rain here for eastern Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and the Carolinas. So it's going to be a very fine line here between where we have those freezing temperatures and we're getting that ice compared to those areas getting that rain. But as we go further ahead through this event going into tomorrow evening, that batch begins to lighten up and we just kind of have some scattered drizzle and or freezing drizzle left over before once again going into kind of Thursday, we get that last kind of hoorah out of this system. I think a lot of this here on the northern edge here will be freezing rain. So kind of those greenish colors that you see in this kind of box, expect that to be freezing rain. But this is going into Thursday morning. You can see this last round of this frozen precipitation working through before, again, eventually I think going into Thursday afternoon, much like Dallas, we warm up and we're back to mainly rain here. So I think once we get through Wednesday, Thursday, and into this weekend will be much better, and that ice will begin to melt. And luckily, through this section, we're not expecting as big of impacts as back towards Little Rock and Dallas. But nonetheless, 1/10 of an inch of ice, I think, will be pretty widespread here from Nashville back towards Memphis and kind of all places in between. But still, mainly rain here, I think, for eastern Tennessee, down towards Birmingham, Atlanta, Charlotte, all rain out of this kind of active pattern. So looking at the mid-Atlantic here, much smaller impacts here into the mid-Atlantic, but I do think going into later tonight and into tomorrow morning, we get kind of this system that, like I said, is moving through Little Rock and then Nashville going into the overnight. As we get further into the overnight and it makes its way into the mid-Atlantic, we could see some light snow here into the higher terrains of West Virginia, even out here into portions of Kentucky and up into northern Virginia. Maybe Baltimore seeing a little bit of light snow out of this. And that will happen past midnight tonight, going into kind of tomorrow morning, maybe even coastal areas of Delaware, Maryland, Jersey here, seeing some of that light snow. Don't expect anything intense out of this, but nonetheless that you could wake up going into your Wednesday morning and see the ground covered with at least a dusting of snow in some of these places here, kind of in this general area that I have circled here, having the highest chances of seeing that. But other than that, that will likely melt for most of us going into Wednesday, and then Wednesday night, and then Thursday we get another batch of precipitation here to kind of work its way into the region, but I think most of that will be kind of confined here to the Carolinas, and will be all rain for us here in the Carolinas going into Thursday afternoon and Friday. So ice in this area, really not much to talk about here. Maybe a glazing of ice for some of us, stretching from kind of southwestern Virginia here into maybe the higher terrains up towards DC, but really not expecting much icing impacts here. In terms of snow, though, I wouldn't be surprised to see, again, that area here, especially into the higher terrains of West Virginia, seeing those accumulations, maybe an inch or two up into portions of West Virginia. As for a place like DC, Baltimore, I'm expecting mainly a dusting out of this. But, some places could overachieve, get half an inch to an inch of snow, but more of a novelty event than an impactful event. So after this storm, we will have that dangerous shot of cold air, and this is what we're going to talk about now. But what I do want to mention first, we will have kind of this last hurrah of rain bringing precipitation and unsettled weather into the southeast on Thursday here. So I did want to touch on that real quick. This is going into Thursday afternoon, Friday evening, rain here into the southeast. That will continue going into the overnight Thursday before finally clearing out going into Friday. And then that's whenever it actually cools down into sections of the southeast and the east coast. So while we're warming back up here into the southern plains, we're actually going to be cooling down here into sections of the northeast and southeast going into this weekend as that pattern kind of flips back eastbound. So looking at how cold we're talking, I want you to look at this area of cold air coming down from Canada, and this is brutal cold. Let me tell you, this is Thursday night here is what you're looking at, and this is still mainly up in Canada, but that is going to dive southward into New England, and that combined with some cold air damming here into the Carolinas is going to produce a very cold weekend ahead of us. And it's kind of a freakish shot of cold air. It's really only going to last 24 to 48 hours, and once you're done with that, you're really back to normal to above average temperatures. So this might catch a lot of people off guard, but we'll look at this here. This is going into Friday afternoon here. You see this blob kind of these very cold temperatures working their way down into New England. And then going into the overnight Friday, that continues and kind of tries to trap itself here into sections of the Carolinas and the mid-Atlantic, producing those below average temperatures before eventually that clears out going into Sunday and the kind of the beginning of the following week. So how cold are we talking here into New England? Looking at these temperatures, this is for Friday afternoon. So this is really whenever this begins to settle in. We're below 0 degrees here into a big section of New England into Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, upstate New York, below freezing Friday afternoon. So this is kind of out in, the middle of the afternoon when you expect it to be the warmest. We're below freezing. And then we're into the teens here to Boston, maybe the 20s into New York, but going into Friday night is whenever this is really going to kind of peak. And you can see here, these are our lows for Friday night going into Saturday, below 0 here into New York, sections of Massachusetts, and then all the way up into Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, upstate New York, well below 0. And we'll talk about those wind chills as well, but this stretches all the way down the I-95 corridor, teens in Philly, potentially single digits into New York. Wouldn't be surprised to see that at all. Before going into Saturday afternoon, again, another cold day, single digits for a lot of us, and then teens and 20s down towards Philly, Baltimore, and New York City before we go into Sunday afternoon, and we're already back into the 30s and 40s. So this really will be a quick shot of cold air, but it will be brutal. And just to show that to you here, looking at these wind chills, this is going into Friday afternoon, sub-zero wind chills for a lot of us here, millions of us, into sections of New England, potentially a place like Boston not getting above 0 with wind chill values included on Friday. And then as we get into Friday night and Saturday morning, this is whenever it begins to get dangerous and even deadly in some places. We're looking at below 50 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chills here into sections of New Hampshire and Vermont into those higher terrains. I wouldn't be surprised to see Mount Washington get down past -80, -90 with the wind chills. So this really will be crazy stuff. And even into the metropolitan areas here along I-95, very cold temperatures going into Saturday morning before, again, we begin to rebound going later into the weekend and into the following week. So talking about that long range pattern here, after we're finally done with all this ice, all this snow, and all this crazy cold weather, going into the start of next week, you can see these red temperatures are already back. So what we've kind of been dealing with all January here and this winter, really besides that Christmas cold outbreak that we had, we're already right back above average with those temperatures to start next week. So I think a much warmer week next week, also probably a stormier week, as well as we'll probably get a couple of systems to cross the country and produce potentially even some thunderstorms here into the southeast, as we've seen plenty of already this winter. But I think that continues going into next week and really going long range. I'll move this ahead, going out into the 10-day area. We're still above average and even going crazy long range. This still looks like a very warm stretch of weather ahead of us for the east. So those of us that haven't seen snow yet in the east and want to see it, I'm not really seeing much right now really that indicates any kind of change in this pattern. So this is likely going to hold on for the first half of February after we get through this ice storm and that shot of cold air into New England. But with all that said, if you did enjoy the video, I'd love for you to like the video, share it with anybody who you think might be affected by these rounds of ice into sections of the country, and especially that dangerous cold shot into New England. Make sure you're sharing with them and telling them about that coming their way. And then, of course, if you haven't already subscribed, love you to do that because we are getting crazy close to 1,000 now. And that is going to be a super cool thing to see whenever we do hit it. But with all that said, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay safe out there, stay warm, and I will see you all tomorrow.